Well, good morning and welcome to History 232, the history of the Middle East from 1453 to the present. This is our live broadcast, and I know that you can hear me and you can see my screen. Same process that we've had in the past. Two goals today, updates and questions. And the content today is I'm going to pick up on Iran from about 1700 forward, the Safavid dynasty, and I'll give you the takeaway when we get to that point. All right, so we all know that our modules open on Monday. They close on Saturday at 11:59. Sunday I use for grading. Next week is our spring break. So on Monday I will just post a spring break greeting and let everyone know that Module 10 will not open until March 29th. All right, and that is a Monday. And so week 10 will be the week of March 29th. Now, week 10 is our exam number 2, which are 3 essay questions. So next Wednesday, even though it's during the spring break, what I will do is open the study questions for you. That'll be March. You'll get the exam questions on the 24th. And on March 31st, which is a Wednesday, I will open the link so you can submit the 3 essay questions. That'll be important. Submitting the 3 essay questions, you'll have March 31st through April 3rd. So you have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday to submit those. So just review again. Next week is spring break, so there's really no classes. You can do work on your own, but there won't be any live broadcasts because the college is officially closed for the spring break. However, next Wednesday on the 24th, I will open the study questions for exam 2, and that'll give you 1 week from the 24th of March to the 31st of March to work on them. And then starting on the 31st, you can begin to submit them as we've done in the past. So that's generally what we have set up at this point. All right. Week 9, we're the Safavid Empire, pre-modern Iran. This empire going from 1450, almost at the time of the fall of Constantinople, all the way up to 1700. Sometimes the dates vary. It could go to 1750. It's in that neighborhood. It just depends on where individuals want to draw the line. All right, so it's an important period. I also have for you excellent readings for you in the weekly assignments in the modules, podcasts from the BBC, and then the Ottoman History podcast is there. And then there's a brief media clip on the decline and fall of the Safavids. If you go into question number 5, which is discussion question 5, it's the evolution of Iran after the Safavid dynasty ended. So even though you have a week where you can move away from the computer a little bit and not be tied to the screen, the goal is to keep reading the material. You've got the textbooks that are there. Keep working on your document case study. Do some writing on that as well. That's important. So you have some time to do that so you can get caught up a little bit and make sure you submit everything, because I'll still be working here. Next week you can submit the document case study materials with the links that I have provided. All right. So keep up the good work on the discussion questions and the web activities. The more content you have in there, the better it'll be to help you, especially this week when we're looking at the evolution of what we call modern day Iran, and I'll get into that as well. Remember, the research papers are due at the end, your document case studies, and due today. Today's the 19th. Is question 5. That's the chronology. If you don't have it today, you can always get it into tomorrow, which is Saturday. We want to get everything in by Saturday at 11:59 so that I can then go ahead and mark all that material and get it into your grade box. All right. Constructs are under the assignments. You go into the main menu, you'll see assignments, then you'll see constructs, and if you click on that, you can then see them listed there. There's the major, minor, and then also the super constructs. The search for order and stability, that's important. Transitions of power, expectations. Civilization cycle is under research work in the main menu. So that's a cycle that all civilizations, countries, empires, nations generally, many historians, anthropologists, other scholars as well, kind of look at this cycle as to how civilizations, in a sense, move through that. And when the cycle ends, then it collapses, and then something else could come along that could begin to piece it back together. But these are things that take a long period of time to take place. We've already seen from 1922, and next year will be 2022. It's almost been 100 years since the fragmentation that's taken place, and you can see from 1922 until today what's happened, and then you can go back and you can look at the time period 1822 to 1922 and see what was happening, and then you can go back another 100, you know, to the 1700s, getting up to the 1800s. What's happening in that process? All right, exam three then will be week 10, which will be week after next, and there'll be three questions. And so the questions are going to come from the modules. There'll be very specific questions. They'll come from the collaborate sessions that I've had as well, and the other readings from the textbook. So you want to look at full, complete essays as you've done in the past. You need an introduction, then you need a narrative with evidence, details, specifics to support what it is that you're talking about, and then you need to have conclusions, and you need to have some summaries like that. All right. So that's kind of where we are with everything at this point. And before I launch into the Safavids, what questions do you have? And then I'll give you the takeaway for today. Questions, comments, anything I can help you with in the course at this time.
I'm good.
Okay. Anybody else? Anyone else? Questions, comments? Know where we are, where we're going? All right. Anything comes up? Good. Okay. Excellent. Um, what you can do, anything comes up, just raise your hand or say, yeah, Professor Harkins, I just remembered something. Can you take this question? And be happy to do that. If you need any help, email me after the class today. I won't be able to get to them till about 1:30 when I'm finished, but I will, work on those. All right. The takeaways for today then is we're going to deal with the changes that take place in what we call Iran today from 1700 forward. So I'm going to try to get us from 1700 to 1900, getting close to World War One, so you can see what happens. So an exam question would be, uh, what happens in the Safavid dynasty from 1700 to 1900? Explain the changes. Who are the key leaders? What's happening? I mean, it's important in the world today. I mean, we don't walk down the hallways or get out into cafes as much anymore, but you could ask somebody, oh, do you know what happened in Iran from 1700 to 1900? And then probably, of course, they don't know. Some people might, but it's an important scenario to understand the conflicts that we have today that are generating out of this area. Now, remember, the Safavids are not part of the Ottoman Empire; they're to the side of it, and so their contact is with Afghanistan, India, Russia, those specific areas. So that's the struggle that's going to take place. However, from time to time, they do work with the Ottomans, but they spar against each other over territory in the Tigris Euphrates, and there's some religious issues from time to time that they have. But by and large, they're trying to survive in an area that's changing very rapidly, and you'll get to see that today. All right. So that's where I want to go, and that's kind of the takeaway from what we want to cover today. All right. So if you take a look at the map that I have in on the screen here, a little pointer. Let's see if I get a little pointer up. You can see this core area here, and then you can see where the Ottomans came in, and you can see where the Russians come in. And so, what's going to happen over this time period, starting in 1700, is going to be an erosion and a fragmentation where these people that are here. Oftentimes, we can refer to them as Persians, coming up from the original Persian Empire, the Second Persian Empire, the Sassanids, to where we are in 1700 and the creation of the Safavid dynasty, idea of a Shah and how they're going to function. The difficulty is that within this territory that you see, even with the shaded lines that are there, is extremely diverse. They're very, very tribal. And if you think the clans in Scotland are tribal, these groups here are very tribal focused. And they want to stay in their specific enclaves, and they'll support the Shah militarily on certain things. But the Shah, during the Safavid rulers really don't control everything you're seeing on the screen, because they know who some of these tribal leaders are and they communicate with them. But to try to say that there's some form of unity here, it's a very loose confederation, and that's part of the problem. And so all of that is alien to what we would refer to as a centralized system. Now, the Russian system is centralized. The Ottoman system goes back and forth. And right now, under Abdulhamid II, they were trying to get back some of that power. He's the last sultan that really had power in the Ottoman Empire. And so, in between these areas, you can see on the map where the purple is, which is basically Ottoman territory, and up in the green area here, which is really Russian. You see this as we move forward. Um, you can get even a modern day map, and it'll show you the great diversities within the empire, within what we call Iran today. All right, so that's a little bit of background for us, but it all starts in northern Iran. Qajars, they're a tribe. This is where it's going to start. What they're going to do is come in and take over the some of the trappings of the earlier group, again Safavids as well. And it goes back. I covered a lot of that. We talked about Tewfik and what was happening all the way up. We ran some of that in relationship to the Anglo-Sudan that was happening. So this is it's this is the tribe. Now we're talking northern Iran, right? Not southern. Way in the north, there's these Qajars. Origins, probably the nomadic groups that came into this territory. And then there's a trail that huge, coming out of Siberia all the way, north of India, in the Chinese, way in north where the Mongols are. They're just, it's kind of a exodus of people leaving that area and just flowing out into what we're looking at on the map. So there's a tribe in the northern Iran that are basically referred to as the Qajars. Okay, and the person, it's Aga Muhammad, who becomes the Shah, and the Shah is there, uh, the similar between the Sultan, the Caliph, Caliph, and then the Caliphate, Ottoman Empire, and then on this side you're going to have the Shah, and the key individual. This is like Shah on Shah. There's going to be other Shahs that are associated with these tribal areas. This is, and the leader coming out of the Qajars is this key individual by the name of Aga Muhammad. All right. And what happens is they want to get the Russians out of the southern Caspian. And what's going to happen over time is they're going to lose a lot of this territory. And the relationship between the individuals that we call Iranians today, or those that are of Persian descent and other descent coming out of Afghanistan, coming out of India, Pakistan, coming out of the areas where the Mongols, where there's a whole series of those, is that, the Russians are causing them a lot of difficulty in the southern Caspian. And so what happens is the Russians want all of that territory. Look at how north up uh, the the Persians will go on both sides. And what's really critical, a lot of people in history don't really understand it, is that, oh, the Caspian, they can identify it on a map. It's geography. Geography is wonderful. But the idea is there's a lot of resources here and they got to cross over and get into the Black Sea so they can get out. The only other way is to move everything down this way, going through the Straits of Hormuz, and where you're going to go. And so things that grow here in this area, these are where these great watermelons are. There's what grows in this area here in around the Caspian. The only other place in the world it grows is in the Delta in Egypt, and you won't read much about it. They don't talk much about it because what they grow here, they consume themselves or trade. But basically, the Russians are down into these areas now. The Russians got wow, the Crimea. They're over in the Caspian, and so this is just it's like Lake Michigan is to us. Everybody wants to be there. Well, and so do the Persians. This is they've been here 500 years in these areas, huge long periods of time. So right now when we get started here, Aga Mohammed and others coming in, they want to get the Russians out of the southern Caspian. They got to do that. Okay. So in 1786, they established a capital at Tehran. So now this is relatively new. I say, well, it's almost 1800. I mean, it's not a capital city that's 5,000 years old or 2,000 years old. No, they established a capital at Tehran, which is still, it's a northern, these are northern peoples, Qajars. All right. In 1796, Aga Mohammed is crowned Shah of Iran. Okay. And that's all the area that you're looking here. And it's like tribal groups. These are tribal groups. It's a loosely knit group, and they're going to provide these tribal groups are going to provide soldiers and resources. But you know what happened in the Ottomans? Well, all those governors and all those groups in the Ottoman Empire, by the time they sent all their soldiers there, that wasn't going to work. The Ottomans westernized and took on, creating an Ottoman imperial army and training and weapons and all that. And that just what a lot of people just didn't like. Go ahead, Devin.
What was the spelling on that town again? Where you established the slide back? Where you,
Today it's
Tehran.
Tehran.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Teher, but it's Tehran, right? Yeah, it's sort of like what the Ottomans did eventually, which was it's Ankara, but it's Ankara. It's in almost the center of what we call modern day Turkey. So that's was their area. So they moved from Bursa and create those. But this is what's established, and it's still there today. But you figure 1800. That's not a it's not a long time ago. I mean, it's we're talking 1786, right? We're doing some things over here. We're just getting
Yeah.
started after the American Revolution, and we're getting started. They're already establishing a new capital here and fighting the Russians, right?
What is
Okay,
the
so
area?
now they have a Shah.
Sorry, I had another
Go
question.
ahead.
What is we're talking about northern Iran and the Qajars, obviously, but what is that area over the Tigris Euphrates like? I know there's a lot of mechanisms with keeping those
Here,
river systems
here.
going and stuff, right? Yeah. So
Yeah, it's all still controlled. The Ottomans and the Iranians spar. They fight over. They struggle over it.
okay,
There,
gotcha.
it's a border. This is a fault line. You see where these shaded lines are? Those are fault lines. It's like the big fault,
Areas of
earthquake
dispute.
faults. They move every once in a while. These are what we call border people, um, and generally they tend to get along. It's like in the Balkans until the Balkans explodes. Same kind of thing. There's a lot of different people that are there, a lot of different religions that are there. Here they don't have as many of the religious issues, but they do have other issues. So they have to find a way to get along. I mean, there's individuals that belong to the Ottoman Empire that are in the Tigris Euphrates, and they don't want to have anything to do with the Persians. And there's Persians that are here that don't want to have anything to do with the Ottomans. But together, they coexist until they start drawing the border lines. When they draw the borders, then they're going to protect the borders like that. This is a trading operation that's through here. And the canals are still working. People are still there. I mean, the religious sites are still there. Oh my goodness, there's just a lot going here. And so, they try to share those and they go back and forth. It's been a big issue. Um, Even before you have what we call a Shah of Iran. And then the Russians are just pouring in here. They want to take over everything. The Russians want to swing it all the way over, and literally, they'd like to control all of that. They're expansionists, and you're going to see that happen today. And so, border people generally try to get along. I mean, look at the struggles today in India and Pakistan over borders, Afghanistan. Well, we're into once the confederated systems stop, you end up with border wars. People call them brush wars. They're not brush wars, they're border wars. Syria and Turkey, what are they fighting over? What is it? Is it a border? If they leave the border people alone, the border people generally can make it kind of work. They have been, but there's other issues at stake when you get into a modern nation state. Okay, he takes the sword of the Safavid Shah Ismail, and I didn't get a chance to do all of that. A lot of it will be in your reading. So now what we're doing is the Qajars are taking over the this dynasty, and they're going to make it work, just as when the followers of Osman got into Bursa, they took over, the trappings of the right Seljuk Turks. And when the Romans came in, they took over a lot of the trappings of the Greeks.
They revived them.
All of this. We were absolutely, you can see that. So it builds on this uh, because the people that were there were tied to the Safavids. It's back in their ancestry. Their great great grandfathers, their great great grandmothers, all knew about that, and they passed it on down. And so the Qajars are smart. If we want to get some form of a confederation here, tying us together, we're going to move into this position. So they take the sword, and this is what continues all the way until the last Shah of Iran. Okay, he is succeeded by Fath Ali, a nephew. All right, I'm just giving you a few of the names here, but I'm going to pick this up a little bit for us. Okay, and so who's helping? Oh boy. The Russians and the British are helping with an orderly transition of power, you see. That's one of the constructs that I have. And so when Fath Ali comes in, the British from one side over here, the Ottoman side, and the Russians here, from the eastern side, what they do is they're helping. They want an orderly transition, and that's good because what happens is there's other tribal groups that maybe want to promote somebody else, but we want to keep it sort of in the family. And so the Russians and both the British have a lot to gain. They don't want a war breaking out in Iran. They don't want all this chaos because it's going to disrupt trade and their enclaves that they have, these foreign enclaves that are there. So what are they doing is they're propping up that we today we call them regimes. So they're gonna do that. And so the Russians and the British will cooperate on this because they don't, if they don't support the transition, let's say the British back out, then the Russians will have sole position on that and tell all the local groups, you see, those British aren't any good. They weren't really interested in you. And so if the Russians drop out, the British will say, see, those Russians weren't interested in you. So both of them are there. This is the typical pattern throughout history that you'll see, but you'll see it played out here. And so now we've got the Russians and we've got the British. And today the Iranians are working with the Russians. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Okay. Ali has a close relationship with religious leaders. So now he starts bringing in more religious leaders. No different than Constantine the 11th with the patriarch, no different than the Latin West, than the Greek Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, no different with the Ottomans as well. A lot of that is embedded in what we call the Sultan, who, in a sense, is a representative of their religion. And so Ali has a close relationship with religious leaders because he surely wants to get some objectivity. Go ahead.
Sorry, I got another one. So with the the Ottomans were Sunni, right, and the Safavids were Shiite. Are the Qajars and Ali and the founder Aga Muhammad, are those all Shiite Muslims? Or
Some,
Some. Okay.
There's some. Hmm. There's still open toleration of religious groups within the Persians because they go back to the Zoroastrianism that they had. There's other groups that are
Right.
there. It's a
They
multiple
they lent
of
people.
groups through through this period. Oh yes, they're here, and so he has to make that choice to bring in these religious leaders. Um, but he isn't going to have difficulty with the religious leaders at this point. He's going to have it with the Russians, and he's going to have it with the British. But the religious leaders are critical in getting him the support that he needs from those different tribal groups, because the religious leaders make visits to these areas because that's where their followers are, and they want to see them. They've had that, and so this is you'll see it as it comes together here. But absolutely, there's religion's a big proponent of what's happening here. And so what he does then, he had them participate in the government. Now you have to go back in time as the Qajars, as they are called, to migrate into this area. They then convert to Islam, and the idea prior uh, in this when the Qajars come in, they have to pick up the trappings of the previous of the earlier Safavids, and when they do that, what they are going to do then is bring the religious element into the government to provide some stability and structure for the government, because the religious leaders, as they are in the Ottoman, are the most educated. They understand economics, politics. They understand all of that. They've been there. They're educated. They know Greek. They speak different languages. They're able to do that because they were there. And so, what better way to stabilize and move us forward to confront whatever we're going to be confronting? And the first thing out of the box for them is, wow, the Russians. So he'll put them in there, um, into the government. And much like the Sultan, just like the Constantine the 11th and the Byzantine, the Shah's word is final. All right, so that's the beginning aspect of how this is going to work, as the Shah has certain powers over a defined territory, just as the Sultan does. However, the further you go from the capital, the less his word means. They understand it, but they're tied to their tribal groups. Okay. Shah's sons then are made provincial governors, same as you see in the Ottomans. Why? Well, because as they divide these areas up, creating just like we have states, it's not like, wow, everybody's excited about drawing these state lines, and some people aren't. We got all the United States and these borders. Well, some people don't. When those lines were being created, they didn't like those lines at all. They wanted bigger territory. So the sons go out, become provincial governors, and get acclimated with the people that are there, because the individuals are different. Just like our states are different. People have different needs in different states, and what happens in one may not happen in another one. And so if you're going to try to pull some things together, you have to fine tune it and meet the needs of the people. Coming in and saying, okay, this is what the Shah wants, this is what you're going to do, isn't going to get you anything. No, not going to happen. It's got to be a decentralized system in those. So each one of these provincial areas is almost a country into itself, but it's loosely connected, you see. And that's generally what we don't have today. Most of these confederated systems have been stamped out, and now we're into these nation states, and they fight over borders and all kinds of other things. But here, the sons are going to learn. This is a learning process, all right? And so Iran still not unified. And so the idea is, when the Qajars come in and their descendants, is the idea is, well, we got to unify it all like everything else, because that's going to be the power base, because everything's been going for unification uh, throughout the Ottoman territories and others. Everything is moving in this direction. And so they understand, in order to be a country, a nation, in order to function against these Russians, tribal groups just won't do it, because we're up against some major unified countries that can put more resources and power on us It's not like the old days of getting, two or three tribal groups to attack somebody else and the war's over and the battle's over. That won't happen. No. Okay. They don't have any social cohesion either. Okay. They're culturally very different in different areas, and so they respect that. But what they're trying to do is, well, what are some of the things that all of us are kind of interested in? So it takes a long time to build that because people have to step out of the area that they're in, and they like the routine. They like to get up and know what they're going to do and not worry about that. They don't like anxiety. Nobody likes all that. It's all those things that you know what's going to happen here, so they don't have that. What happens in their area they know about, and what happens somewhere else, that's their area. We don't bring it in here and get us confused with it, right? Absolutism of the Shah is limited, so they're not going to be like Louis the 14th in France. They're not going to be like that. Even though his word's final, he's not a total absolute ruler. So it's a different system. And as I explain it, you can probably say, well, it's got some positives to it, but the idea is not going to last because it won't be able to fend off the Europeans, no, especially the Russians. I mean, they're because the cohesion isn't there. The political cohesion isn't there. The social cohesion isn't there. There may be more economic cohesion that's there to get them moving with trade and the resources. So the Shah is not that. No, Ali and the sons are concerned about the power of the Russians. That's a threat, a big threat to them because they got territory that they need to defend. They have people they need to defend, and the Russians are at their border or at the doorstep like that. Okay. And so the Iranians, the Persians have been holding the Afghans in check. And so they got some border security with Afghanistan. So if you want to know why we have all this difficulty with Afghanistan, with the British and everyone else and some of those documents you've been reading, it stems from this area here. Um, the Iranians the Persians have a pretty good relationship with the Afghans. And so the Afghans generally listen to them and they work almost hand in hand on some things. Not everything, but there's a little bit of a good handshake between these two areas. All right. So in 1801, Russia moves into Georgia. Okay. Georgia is basically at this time on it's Persian. It's under the control of the Qajars. It was under control of the Safavids, and I'll tell you, it's not under the control. uh, yeah, it's not under the control of Iran today. Yeah, it's better known as Soviet Georgia, a state into itself. So you can see what's going to happen to it, right? Okay. And in 1803, the Russians move into the Caucasus. Hmm, what's going on? Ah, yes, the French Revolution, 1789 to 1815. Remember, way back 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was telling you about that. What are the Russians doing? When everybody's focused on the French Revolution and Napoleon, the Russians are taking advantage of these areas and just moving into them. Caucasus for oil. Who controls the Caucasus today? You can look on a geography map and take a look at how all this came about. So, what Iran is today, territorial, is a lot smaller than what it was at one time. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The Russians are always sometimes right. Yeah. Well, they knew where to go. Crimea, Caspian, Caucasus, oil, resources, territory, right? If you ever have time to read it, the stories are really tragic. Is that first they convinced once they got into big oil, uh, they brought hired and took them by train and bus loads and of Iranians to work in the oil fields and to build roads and um, gave them contracts for 1, 2, 3, 5 years. And when the Iranians come back home, they lost about 50 pounds each, and they were enslaved, is what they were. They were enslaved. It's terrible. As to what happened. So there's a interesting. So what you see today and how Iran and Russia is working together. If they went back in their history just a little bit, they'd see how that relationship worked out. I don't know what's driving them today because they'll lose quite a bit here. Oh, in 1804, Russia moves into the Khanate of the old Khans and Baku, the Baku oil fields, right? So Germany was after him in World War II. Huge oil fields, right? Hmm. And so, what are the Safavids doing? What are the Qajars doing? You know, it's like, okay, here come the Russians, right? And so, in 1807, Iran signs a treaty with Napoleon, thinking, well, we've got to get the Russians out of here, and one way to do that is that we can sign up with the French, and the French are fighting the Russians and the British and everybody else with Napoleon, and so here we go. We're playing one power, one European power off of another power. Hopefully, that we can provide some things, and you can figure out what they wanted. You know, we'll support France, and France, you have to do something for us. Okay, then Iran pledges to declare war on Great Britain. Well, that's good. That's exactly what Napoleon wanted. And what's going to happen, right? Iran can also, the Persians can have the Afghans declare war on India. And so now we're all set. The French ambassadors, as you call them, you know, the French envoys, all the treaty people out there, they get the Qajars, they get them all moving. And you know what's going to happen here? All right, we want you to declare war on those Russians. You know, we want you to declare war on the British. We want you to get your, you know, that, you know, this relationship you have with Afghanistan. You've worked well with them. With these Afghans are basically related, many of them, as to movement from way out into the great steppes. I mean, it's like a huge migratory pattern. They're related, so we want you to declare, you know, war on India, and the Afghans agree to do that. Why are they going to do that? Well, they want something. What do they want? Okay, Iran grants the French safe passage across their territory, but the Persians, the Iranians, want something. That's why they've gone to the French so that they can then push the Russians. So when this war ends, the Iranians, the Persians want something. What do they want? They want them to recognize their claim in Georgia and help them get the Russians out of there. That's what they want. Okay. That's exactly. Okay. So what you do is you play one off against the other. This is important. And so the Iranians are moving down this line, thinking, all right, we're thinking that we're going to declare war on Russia. We'll declare war on Britain. We'll get the Afghans to declare war on India, and we'll get as many of our tribal groups organized as we can. We'll get some French experts out here. We'll get artillery. We'll get all these people out here, and we'll start attacking those Russians. You know, that French cannons, those French artillery, and then we'll go after the Russians, and all this will work out in our best interest. Okay. French general arrives, Tehran, to train the Iranian army in modern warfare. Sound familiar? Same thing that the Ottomans were doing. Wow. So now we got artillery pieces here, and we got training. We got weapons coming in, you know, and we let the French come across our territory, so the French are coming out there as well. They want to get control of the Black Sea area, Caspian. The French are coming. And so all this is taking place. So Iran thinks, well, we've got an opportunity here. We can push those Russians right out of Georgia and get back our northern territory, right? Oh, wow. Oh, this isn't good. France negotiates a treaty with Russia. Oh, my goodness. What happens? Well, it's called the Treaty of Tilsit. Oh, my gosh. What's going to happen? What's going to happen here? Well, what's going to happen is everything we're working on with the French is going to literally stop because now there's a treaty with Russia. And one of the reasons, and it doesn't come out, but I've led you to this, we can make the deduction here. You deduce things, and it doesn't come out in major textbooks, and it should. One of the reasons that Russia moves a little bit to the French aspect is not so much the fighting that's done uh, out there in what we call, um, you know, the Western Front in World War One, in that Western European theater during the French Revolution. It's out here because the Russians, what they want to do is get the French out of here so they can have a free hand. So we'll and Napoleon uses this as another card to play. He says, well, We're really going to put more troops out there. We're going to do all these things out here in what we can Persia and Iran and the Russians. That's too close to Russia for them, and so the Tsar is going to back off, sign an agreement with France, and then when the French pull out, the artillery pulls out. Uh, the Safavids, Qajars, the tribal leaders are there facing an onslaught of the Russians. And I won't go into that. You can read it. All right. Now, knowing that was going to happen, you see, the Qajars are pretty smart. They're very diplomatic. They know about negotiations. And so when the French tell them that that's going to happen, they say, good. And you probably say, why would they want to do that? Because they want to get into the treaty. They want to get into the treaty that the French sign, this treaty. And in the treaty, uh, we're going to tell the Russians they're not going to get this territory. Okay. And so the French, like anything else, see how much more they can get out of the Russians to keep from putting the Iranians. So who's used the Persians, the Iranians here are a chip, and Napoleon plays that. The Russians do about anything to make sure that they're not in there because they want to get the territory. And they still have it today. And so what happens, Iran is the French eventually tell them after the fact that they're left out of the treaty. And so they bite back and saying, fine, we're not going to declare war on Britain. And definitely we're not going to get the Afghans to attack India. We're not going to do any of that anymore. Thank you very much. Right. So when all that's going on, how would you feel if you're in a part of, this larger territory and all these things are happening? Pretty soon the tribal leaders begin to think, something's wrong. We're first we're fighting against them, and now we're not, and the French are leaving, and the Russians are still here. It's very confusing because there's so many different messages as to what happens. You have to be very careful when you enter into these. And so it must have been pretty desperate. You see, I haven't seen a lot of the documents, and I'm not too sure where they all are. I've seen a few over time as to how for them to move so quickly to the French, it must have been to the point where they might have been overrun completely by the Russians, and we don't know that. But for them to move very quickly, I'm sure people within the Qajars told them that there's a downside to this if it doesn't work, could really lose. And the French pulled the rug out, left. Yep. Okay. 1809, the British promised. They said, we want you to keep in the war, but what we'd like you to do is attack the Russians. And the only thing they can really get out of the British in 1809, remember the French Revolution is going to go to 1850, 1815, before it's over. And so, we've got a good 6 years. Britain promised an annual subsidy to the Persians, to the Qajars, the Safavids. Not a whole lot of weapons and things like that, but they're going to give them some money to the what you call the leader, the Shah. It isn't going to go to the tribal leaders, and it's going to go to this governmental structure of how they're going to operate, so they can buy things to keep the war going and keep the Russians out. So they're going to do that. Okay. Then they managed to get them to go to the next level. Okay, they agreed to train the Iranian army. So now we're going to have just as the Ottomans did. And so the first group were being trained. The French came in with artillery, and then they went home, and their trainers went home. And then all of a sudden, the British come out. So now we're against um, you know, the Russians. We're still against them. And now what we've got to do is now we've got the British trainers in here. And so the British are helping. And as long as the British are there, they'll keep the Russians at bay for a while. So the Russians basically, there's a trade-off here. And part of it is the British and the Russians are supposed to be on the same side during the French Revolution. Everything I've read is that they were all working against France. But out here, they're not. They're training an Iranian army. And the Russians are furious about that. Why are you doing that? So there's a lot of diplomatic things going on at the same time. There's almost like two revolutions going on. This is the one that takes place out here. This one is as interesting as the French Revolution. because the Qajars are fighting from a very weakened position because they're just getting started, and that's it's not easy to do that. Okay, so they send, oh yes, Captain Henry Bethune. I think he's about 6'6" or 6'7" or 6. He's a really tall guy out there, and he's helping them, and so out he comes. And then they also help set up like a police force, like you have the police force eventually, like that are basically constables. So Britain's helping them set some things up like this so that they can begin to what move in a more modern direction. Oh yes, 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 that's what they're doing. They're moving in that direction, and so Bethune and the British that come are artillery experts, and so the Iranians get pretty good using artillery. What they want is technology, technology to defend themselves against their neighbors, and they're not very neighborly. All they want to do is take part of their territory, and you give them a little of this, a little more, and pretty soon it's all going to be gone, and there'll be a satellite that'll be set up. So he's an artillery expert, right? And he becomes commander of the Iranian army. Sound familiar? Sounds like what happened with Lord Cromer over in Egypt, isn't it? All right. So the British are moving in a different direction. Well, we'll create the army and we'll put one of our people in charge of the Iranian army because we can't put tribal leaders in there because this isn't a tribal army. It's the same scenario you see in Japan when Japan westernizes. They move away from the old order of all the swords and these great daimios, these feudal lords in Japan. They move away from that and they get Western uniforms, rifles, bayonets, machine guns, all of that, and they become very Western. You see the same thing in Italy. You see the same thing in Germany. It's all of that. That'll come a little later. That's all 1870, but it's the same scenario. It's already played out here. And so that means what? The Persians, Iran, they're on its way to become a nation state of centralized power radiating from a capital area, and that people in the provinces do what their provincial governors tell them to do, and they all do about the same. And that's what it's going to be. And they don't like that. Okay. And so in 1814, we have the Treaty of Tehran. Tehran. Okay. And French Revolution is just about ending. Okay. Any agreements with European powers hostile to Britain are ended. Okay, because we've been here to help you. So, yeah, any agreements you've got with anybody else that's been hostile to Britain is ended. That being the French and anybody that helped the French. Okay, and maybe Russia because they're hostile to Britain from time to time. And Russians are. And so now what we have is we have the British coming in and creating what we would often refer to as a sphere of influence, like that. Okay. And so who's in India? Oh, yes. Okay. So Iran convinced the surrounding other neighbors she had, like the Afghans and others, not to invade India because we are working with you. So let's keep the peace. So Iran has that power, that authority, that relationship to talk to the Afghans. There's a very interesting relationship between Afghanistan or the Afghan people and what we call the Persians or the Iranian people, because again, there's a border area, and these are generally border people, and they generally get along and don't really want all these fine border lines, but everybody's got to draw them all out, and so the British say, you know, that we can't have any of that. So the Iranian representatives, they make the commitment, they make the travel, the journey, they get it set up so everything is just between their neighbors. We're not going to invade, we're not going to attack India, and pretty much they follow that. All right, so things are moving along. Now, when the war is over in 1815, meaning the French Revolutionary War that's there, uh, and of course, the British have been strong backers of these Safavids, the Iranians, the Persians that are there. Um, Maybe we can get the border set. Okay. Well, now we got the border with Russia is going to be decided by a commission. It's a very British kind of thing. You have a border to be decided. In the past, borders were decided by warriors and weapons. And who's got it? Who claims it? We're going to keep it. This is ours. Come over to this side. Come on to our territory. You'll have another war, even though it was yours or was ours originally, and we go back and forth. So now we're going to have a commission. All right. Well, that should be a that when you start hearing those things, you got to get a little nervous like that. Okay. And so, as this commission's meeting, the idea is that Iran's going to receive a largely yearly subsidy. Oh, that's fine. And when they don't want to tell you how much, then now you're into trouble again. You say, well, we're going to have this commission to decide the border, and you're going to get a subsidy. Who's this subsidy going to come from? Well, maybe it'll come from the Russians. Oh, that doesn't sound good. Like we're getting paid for something, right? And it's called the definitive. This is the definitive answer. This is the definitive treaty. Boy, that's another one we don't like. This is not going the way we think it's going here. What do you mean? A commission, right? An undefined subsidy. We don't know how much it's going to be. Where are the details? A definitive treaty. Wow. Well, we're going to end the religious war too. The commission's going to work on that. Okay, so right. You got the Russian Orthodoxy, the Greek Orthodoxy. There's been a lot of religious struggles going on. You see, that's part of the Russian claim is that, well, there's in these areas here of Georgia and the Caspian, there's Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. That's a claim they make. I find that really hard to believe. I would like to, I'm sure there's some there, but how many? It didn't matter. Even if they weren't there, the Russians were still going to say that. Okay. All right. So now we're covering all of this. What is going on here? Okay. Oh, a treaty. Yes. Now we're going to put the commission's going to give us report. Gulistan. That's the treaty. Yeah, you might want to write it down. Gulistan has a number of variations of spelling. You'll read it in different books, different ways. But this is after the French Revolution. What does it mean? Gulistan? Iran cedes to Russia, Georgia, Baku, Shirvan, and the Caucasus. Okay. Wow. What did the British get for that, I wonder? Yeah. So you're going to get an undefined amount of money. A commission has settled it. You see, just as the French and Russians did something, what did the British and Russians do here? You can see why over time in the Middle East, they don't trust anyone. Sometimes they can't. And here's what they lose: Georgia, Baku oil fields, Shirvan, and the Caucasus to Russia. Okay, everything they wanted to continue to control, they're going to lose. This is what comes out of the French Revolution. This is the other side of it. This is what's going on in the East, as we call it, before we get the term Middle East. This is the uh, outcome of that struggle that's going on when the Russians are fighting and the British are fighting and Napoleon's moving and the Austrians and all of that's going on, and Moscow's got all kind, Napoleon gets there and then he has to flee and oh you read all of that and then all of a sudden it's okay, the French Revolution and then the last part of it, Waterloo, and we did some of that, but then here's what's really happening here with the Russians. So look at what they pick up. Okay. In addition, Iran would have no naval presence on the Caspian Sea. None. What does that do for trade? Naval presence. Is that just military? I mean, they had a few military ships, but naval presence. So what's it turns into, a Russian sea? So they're basically going to lose that as well. So I don't know how they came out ahead here. It doesn't seem like there's much of they're accruing anything other than, oh yeah, the religion isn't going to be, and we're not going to continue to fight over religion, which means if the Russians did have some folks there, they might have brought them home, or I'm not sure there was religious persecution. Um, I'd have to do a lot more work to see during this time period if there was religious persecution in Iran. I don't have any evidence for it at the present, so I can't say one way or another. But that was a part of this treaty, and oftentimes I've wondered what was going on with that. In other words, they would stop. Uh, would they do anything to the individuals who were non-Christian living in these areas now, that we just covered? I mean, what's going to happen to these people that are here? These are big areas: Georgia, Baku, Shirvan, and the Caucasus. Some of them just leave and migrate south into other parts of what we call Iran today. The others, I'm sure, stayed. But what happened to them? What you see, that's where there's not a whole lot there. You have to work at it to find that as to what's going on. The Russians don't like to talk a lot about that, and then they spend a lot of their time writing Byzantine history. And so, in return, Russia would support Prince Abbas, the son of Ali as Shah. Okay, there's the big payoff. Another transition of power. No British, Russians. Okay, so what do we get? We get the prince, Abbas, son of Ali, is the next Shah. And it looks like the Russians, going to support him, military help, make sure that stays in power, and make sure they get what they want. They already got some. I mean, how much more do they want? Okay. Well, what's going to generate then is reforms, because a lot of individuals, both in this area that we're looking at here, and the Safavids, aren't too excited about what they just went through. Now, this goes over a period of time that takes place. Okay. Oh, now we see. Under Abbas, Russian soldiers are going to train the Iranian army. Well, first we had the French, then we've got the British, and now we've got the Russians. That's what the Iranian army. Well, who are they going to use it against? Well, definitely they won't use it against themselves. The Russians won't use the Iranian army. So now many of these, I can imagine what the Iranians were thinking about. They had the French army there first with artillery, then they got the British ones there to teach them military tactics and weapons and uniforms, and then also how to become constables and local police. And now they get the Russians in. So boy, they're getting a lot of training. Mm-hmm. Yep. Russian soldiers, you see, are going to train the Iranian army. Those are the ones that they've been fighting against. I don't know if they were the exact troops or not. If they were smart, they would have sent the ones they were fighting back home and brought in some fresh troops, but no telling what was worked out with them. Okay. And so the religious leaders, from Ali to Abbas and others, say, we've had enough of this modernization of the army. We don't want any more of it. They don't like what they see. Why? Because once that army is put together, you know what's going to happen? They're going to use it. And who are they going to use it against? It'll be a surrogate army for the Russians. And it could be used against some of the tribal groups. Could be. They don't like it. Just as they didn't like the modernization in the Ottoman army, just as in Japan they didn't like the modernization, just as in Italy and Germany, a lot of them from the small Germans didn't like all of that. They didn't want any of it. They fought it to the end, especially in Japan. They went down fighting for the old order. They liked small, defined feudal domains over what they had. Look what happened to them after they westernized. All three of them: Japan, Germany, and Italy. All three of them involved in two major world wars. Okay. Books don't talk too much about it. We could write a nice book of what modernization produced there. This is what modernization, unification produced. These armies. And so Iran's heading down the same path. And the religious leaders say, no, don't want that. Well, you know what happened over in the Ottomans? They just got rid of the old Janissaries and those that wanted to fight in the old ways. No, we're going to do that. Okay. Well, we know in 1808 the Russian trainers were out, the French trainers are back, so that's kind of back at before the treaty ends. But I wanted to emphasize that for you a little bit. Um, the French trainers replace the British trainers. We all know that. All right, and here's what happens then. So we already know I've given you French, British, Russian trainers. You got that. Okay, Abbas reforms. Okay, What is he going to do? Taxes, justice system, new textile mills. Okay, so we're moving up economically. Going to reform the tax system. Areas that were never taxed are going to get taxed, and they don't like that. New justice system for everybody, not just the local justice in the provincial areas or where there's governors. We're going to have this, and we're going to get new textile mills. Where are we going to sell all that? Well, of course, to Russia, right? Well, sure. This is the beginning of the modern Iranian history. This is it. Okay. Just a couple more, and then we'll break for today. In 1833, Abbas dies, good about 18 years after the end of the French Revolution. Okay. 1834, his father, the Shah of the Qajar, dies right after, you see. So there's a son, then the father, like that. Surviving his grandson, Aga Mohammed, who rules from 1834 until 1848. Okay. What's important about this? His own family would not recognize him. Hmm. Why? Here's the last slide for today. Why? Why wouldn't his own family recognize him? British and Russian funded his army to keep him in power. That's not what they wanted. That's right. Yeah. The Russians and the British funded his army to keep him in power. They wanted him in power, so they kept him in power. And a lot of the religious leaders didn't like it. And a lot of the people didn't like it. And his own family didn't like it because he was basically controlled by someone on the outside. All right. We're over a couple minutes. I'm sorry about that. This is really powerful history. You can see the application of it today over time. So we're getting closer. And so next week, we'll be back to our regular time on Thursday, 9 o'clock. Thank you for all coming today. I really appreciate it. Sorry about yesterday. The college